So what we're going to demonstrate with this video is the value you can bring to your project by adding site context directly from Google Maps 3D to enhance your project. You can see here my project highlighted on the left, but all of the other geometry you can see in this scene is straight out of Google Maps. The primary reason the client bought this block was for its views and the ability to come in this case, the bedroom, and see exactly what views are visible from that level, what objects are occluded by trees, etc. Coming down now to the living level and the main entertainment area, you can see all of the views to the city, exactly what you will be able to see when it's built. And you can also see what views are of this nature reserve out to the right of the block as well. Okay, so we're going to move on to discussing how to actually go about doing this. And all of this is really possible because this user has, Ellie Michael, has provided a maps model importer for Blender. And this really allows you to use this other program, Renderdoc, to get your Google Maps 3D geometry into Blender so you can then export it out in an appropriate format to make an Enscape asset. There's some really good information on here. I've got links in the details underneath this video to where to go to get this, but step one is going to be to download this maps model importer. And if you go to the release page where it's got the latest release of the maps model importer, so you can see there's a pre-release version right here. I think I'm using this version here. It tells you what version of Blender and what version of Renderdoc it's compatible with. Make sure you get the compatible versions of Renderdoc in particular, otherwise you'll waste a whole lot of time. I did go and update all my stuff to the latest versions and then found that it wasn't working. I think that's been fixed since then, but yeah, you've got to make sure you're using the correct version. I think I was using this version of Model Importer and the newer version of Renderdoc, and it failed. So just get the appropriate versions and you won't have any problems. And he tells you what they are for each release so that you don't have to research it or anything. So download those. The download for Maps Model Importer is a .zip file, so just save it somewhere that it's not going to get moved, deleted, or overwritten, something like that. You also then need to go to Renderdoc and get the appropriate version. So you can see here it's saying 1.13, but the latest version of Renderdoc is 1.16, so don't get that one. You need to go and get the older thing. So you can go to other builds here and download the release that is appropriate for your specific version of the Maps Model Importer. This will change as time goes on, as I'm sure he'll support newer versions. You then also need to, if you don't already have it installed, go to blender.org, download and install the correct version of Blender, which seems to be the latest version of Blender in most cases, but just check on that detail release as well. But yeah, Blender is totally free, Renderdoc's free, and this is free, so you haven't had to pay for anything to enable this functionality. The next thing you're going to want to do is go into Blender and enable that plugin. So to do that, you just go to Edit-Preferences. You'll go down here to Add-ons and click Install. Now, I've already got it installed, but you just go and click on the .zip file, the Maps Model Importer zip file. And once you've done that, it will be visible in the list here. See, Export Maps Model Importer. So that's downloaded and installed. Make sure it's ticked. While you're in here, just a bit of a quirk of Blender, that there's a whole bunch of things down in this tool layers that are not enabled by default. You can see the Object Carver tool, for example, is not on. I don't think this Boolean tool is enabled by default, so just go in and enable that while you're in there. I found that was quite useful for cutting out the site from the finished context. But yeah, there's lots of other standard system plugins you can turn on and have a play around with Blender. After you've done that, you'll want to make a separate shortcut for Chrome that launches Renderdoc specifically. Just makes life a lot easier to do that. So once you've done that, when you go to launch Chrome, you can see here it pops up with this little GPU starting, and it gives it an ID prior to actually enabling the user interface. You need to do that in order to get Renderdoc to work. So if I start Renderdoc over here, you can say inject into process, and I can find 43,920. Right down the bottom. 43,920 and say inject. And then after I've done that, I can click OK. You should see now the Renderdoc process. You can see it up here saying it's captured and it's getting information from there. So I should be able to then go and search for my site. There. That's my site there. Turn on 3D buildings. There we go. And I can go to clean and turn that off. That's going to be... So this is the property that I'm looking at here. And you can see if I zoom in, it's as far as I can get. It's going to be pretty detailed. You can see it's starting to fill in detail in the background. So there's a pretty good geometry there. It's picking up the power lines. It's everything as good as you'd want out of a photogrammetry scan for context anyway. You'd see some houses are fairly basic. They're just sort of blocky. But that's all I really want. So I kind of want to grab this area here. And in this example, I'm just going to grab one area. So all I need to do now is go to Renderdoc. I put a capture after delay of let's say 5 seconds. And if I say capture after delay and go back here, as long as I'm moving around, it will keep the, you can see it stop and pause there. That bit where it stopped and paused, you can see it's now captured that. I can't stress enough how critical it is that you keep panning and moving in Google Maps, otherwise it doesn't actually capture anything at all. So now that I've captured that, I can go to save. I'm going to go to save. I'm going to go to the file location that I want to and give it a name. We'll just call it the site. 37 York, and hit save. And if I go now to Blender, I'm just going to delete this object. You already go File, Import Google Maps RDC. I should be able to pick on that RDC and say import Google Maps. Okay, so this is what's come in. You can see there's a bunch of stuff that I don't need. Gets like these samples that are lower poly versions or lower LODs, but I can just delete those. Now I want to go to my view options. There we go. On the texture. Texture on, you can see what's there. So You can see already this clipping issue at the back here. Blender's default setup is not really ideal for dealing with large things. It's more human size objects. So if you just come into the Blender settings here to the view, you can change the clip end, just chuck a couple of zeros in there. You can see we've got a really low poly version of like the whole coast here. So I'm just going to delete that. If that might be useful to you, you can use those as well, but a bit pointless for what we're doing. Now this next section is me basically struggling to remember how to use Blender, but I'm effectively just deleting the sections of the geometry that I don't need, so that this is skinny down to just the important parts for this specific project. So one thing I've noticed is it seems to export all the meshes twice. So you can see if I click on this mesh and hit delete, it's still there. If I click on it and delete, see there's like multiple versions of the same mesh there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of that, and we'll name this collection we'll call it import. The reason I made that a collection is it just makes it a lot easier to select all of those objects and know that you've got them selected. But what I'm basically going to do here is go through and click and delete all the ones that are sitting on top, so that I've just got one instance of each of these two pieces of geometry. I'm sure Blender gurus have a much more efficient way of doing this than like clicking on them and hitting delete. I don't know how to do that, so I'm just manually brute forcing it, because it frankly didn't take that long. It's probably 10 minutes to go through and clean up all the double ups, and I think it's worthwhile doing so that the file is lighter and overall it's a smaller mesh that you're bringing in. And if you delete too many, then you'll see a big hole there, and you can Control Z to bring it back. But yeah, if someone who knows Blender wants to comment down below as to how to do this efficiently, I'd be most grateful. Thank you. So I'm just using the scene selector and grabbing that collection using the select objects. That'll grab everything in the collection, and I'm just moving it down below the origin because it's going to make it a bit easier to cut a hole in it later when I bring in an FBX. So I'm just bringing it down below that origin line and then going back to plan view. So the next task here, I'm just going to import an FBX I made earlier in Revit, not as part of this recording. It was just a mass I made that is the boundaries of the site, and I exported it from Revit as an FBX, and I'm going to bring that in because I need to cut a hole in my site in the context model here that's the same size and shape as the site. So this is that site coming in, and I made sure that the origin of it in Revit was the bottom corner of the site. So when it comes into here, I've got something I can line it up with. The next step now is I'm just going to get the rotation as correct as I can. This one's pretty easy in that it's a square site, and I know the front of the site is parallel to the road that's in front of it. So I'm just going to hit the R key and type in this case 90 degrees to rotate it to get it kind of right. I think I'm now just zooming in on the site to see if I've got the orientation right, and I believe I don't, so I've actually got to rotate it another 180. And then all I'm doing is just moving it using the transform tool a bit closer to the site. and then I'll rotate it to align with the street and the bottom of this FBX that I've brought in, and I should be able to get that pretty accurate. So I'm just hitting R and then rotating until I'm happy with that. Okay, so the next big task is to get it to the right scale. Now, unfortunately, it seems to come in at just random scales. I've tried this with a bunch of different captures to see if they at least came in at a consistent scale, and it seems to be slightly different every time. So the easiest way I've found to do it is to use the measure tool and put a measurement on the Blender side. Pretty good tool. You can grab the ends and just sort of drag it in. You can zoom in and get it pretty close. So I've just picked the sort of things the furthest apart on the map as I can find that I can pick consistently. The edge of a tennis court's a nice clear line. Edge of a pool's pretty good. I can see that's 6.23584 meters. And now if I go across to Google Maps, I can get the same measurement. So you'll see me zooming in on the same corner of a tennis court here. Make sure you get the same tennis court, obviously. And going to the corner of that same pool, the edge of the waterline. And I can see that's 492.61 meters. So then I just need to do the calculation from there. So I opened up calculator and have just done the large number divided by the small number, which you'll see me typing in here, or maybe I'll do it off screen. And divide that by the specific number in. Okay, I'm going to grab that number, 78.9965. I'm just going to put it off screen so I can see it, but I'll use my selection tool to get the entire thing again. I'll just hit S for scale, and then I'll type the number that was on that calculator in and hit enter. You can see me typing it in the top left corner there. Hit enter, and now it's scaled up. So I'm just going to drag this measure tool back to those locations now that it's scaled and see how accurate it actually is. So just pop it right on the corner of the line there. Go and grab the corner of that pool. Yeah, it's pretty close. And I can see that I'm within 0.02 meters of what I was measuring in Google Maps. So as far as I'm concerned, that scale is close enough for our purposes. Obviously, the larger distance you measure across when you do this, the more accurate it's going to be. So don't try and scale just from like the width of your block or something like that. Use something bigger. Now I really just need to align my site with the site context with the cutout that I've got there. So you can see I'm just sort of lining it up the back corner of the site, which is a pretty good thing to align with. Just trying to get it as close as I can there. So I'm just lining that up as well as I can using the division of the fences on each side and the back fence to try and get a pretty good alignment. Just keeping in mind this is a context model, it's not supposed to be surveyor accurate or anything down to the millimeter. But yeah, that's looking pretty good and starting to align nicely. Let's have a look at it in 3D and see how that's sitting. Yeah. I think that's cutting quite nicely there. Okay, so the final step that needs to happen in Blender is to cut a hole through the main context here. So what I'm going to do is just turn the visibility of the FBX that I brought in, just turn that off with the little eye there, so I can see what's cutting. Now I'm going to have to select the individual areas of geometry there. I go to add, it's the little spanner looking tool there, and then add a Boolean, and I'll then select the site hole and hit subtract, and you kind of have to do this for everyone. So you'll go add modifier, Boolean, click on the little eyedropper, and then I'll just pick site hole from the list. For some reason there's two options for that cut. There's a fast and an exact, but it seems to be each mesh requires a different solution. So sometimes exact works really well, sometimes fast works really well. I find I have to toggle every time I do a cut, I toggle from one to the other and see which one worked the best, and I just keep doing that until I've chopped all of the holes out where I need them. So another task that just needs to be done or should be done prior to exporting is just a little bit of cleanup, because we've deleted all that extra geometry and all those textures now go nowhere. So I'm just going through here to the cleanup tools, and it's just sort of file, cleanup, and you can go through each of these and just make sure you're purging all of these unused textures out of here that you don't need anymore. And at the end of the day, I also like to go to the external data tool and say pack into blend, just so that I know the blend file contains everything I need if I want to edit it at a later date. Now we just need to export it. Going to come on down here to export, and we'll choose the glTF format. I'm going to put it in a separate subfolder called export. It dumps the whole lot in one hit. And as far as settings over here, we'll go for glTF with separate bin and textures. And there's a whole bunch of options here. There's not many that you need to look at. In general, include, we don't want to include cameras. Selected objects is probably a good one. Okay, so we've got those objects selected. Apply modifiers. UVs and normals. We don't want color, vertex colors. Materials are set to export, so yes, we want that. Images automatic is fine. Y is up. Don't really want that, but I think that's okay actually. As far as animation, we don't need any of that. I mean, none of those exist, so if you left them ticked, it shouldn't be a problem, but it's better to just make sure that they're not there. And that should be fine. You'll get this little black dot in the middle. That's Blender's way of saying it's doing some work and processing. And it's going to spin its wheels. If I go to that folder, you can see what it's doing. So it's currently pumping out all of those textures. It's probably a good time to talk about textures. So we have a look at one of these textures. You can see it's a little piece of the puzzle. There is a couple of add-ins that will merge all these textures into one big single texture. So if you find that's more convenient, you want to send these around without having to have them like that, there's some Blender plugins to clean this stuff up and simplify it. As I say, I'm not a Blender expert, but yeah, you can make life a bit easier for yourself if you clean up some of those textures. But basically we've got a bin file and a glTF file and then all the texture files all pumped into this folder. It's relatively quick to export, so that's finished now. Make sure you save your blend file, so if you want to come back in and make alterations or amendments to this file, you can do it easily. And that's it for Blender. We can close out of Blender. Okay, so we're in Revit now. This is my model. It's fairly early stages of design development, so just ignore it for the time being. I'm just going to load a family I made called Context Family. It's a pretty basic little family. I'm just using it to sort of house all of these context models for various projects. I'll show you what the family looks like. It's just a little three-dimensional arrow with a pointy tip so that I can place it accurately in Revit and also see specifically what height it is in 3D, etc. So I'm going to duplicate one of those types and rename it 37 York Street. Then I'll just place one of those in the model. Now I'm going to go to the site plan and then place it on the corner of my site. You can see there it is down there. I'm going to pick that, and you can see because the origin in Blender was all based around that point, if I bring the context in that location, it should be there too. I'm just going to clear out this Enscape asset ID so it's blank for this particular type. I've also got it at the wrong height, so I'll just put it at ground level, but you can see a little arrow there. I've also, the arrow itself, or the geometry that's in it that makes up the arrow, it's on a subcategory called context, so you can turn that off, have it turned off in all of your view templates, so you won't have to see that arrow showing up in your views or anything like that, and that won't affect whether it shows up in Enscape or not. The family will still show up if the master category of site is on. So anyway, that's that little family. I'll include a link to it in the video. Now if I go to Enscape, we can start trying to build this asset. So we'll open the Enscape asset library and go to custom assets. We'll click on the create asset to start the asset creation tool. We can then give the asset we're trying to create a title. I'll just call it the address of the job. I'll put a description in there, something simple like a context model, just something so it's searchable. And then we should be able to go to the Import Geometry tab, select the file that we want to load, the GTLF we created, and Enscape will load it up. It might take a minute to create the preview, but once the preview screen has loaded, firstly you can see that the geometry is working correctly, and secondly you can zoom around and find a good spot to then take a screenshot to use as your thumbnail. The next step is to generate the asset, and when you click that, if you haven't saved it already, it will say it needs to be saved. So go and save the asset package somewhere. I'm just going to save it into the project. Then, yeah, generate asset should start generating. You'll see it take a second and then give you the little green text at the bottom there. It might give you some warnings as well. Next thing you need to do is click on the three little dots, and we can say link Revit family to asset, and then I'll type in the search here and we'll get this little family arrow that we've made. So I called it 37 York Street. Type it in, you'll see context family, click OK, and that should be it. can close out of the asset library and launch Enscape and see what we've done. Now it is a fairly big asset, so Enscape might take a little while to load depending on how powerful your computer is and how massive the site that you tried to capture and bring in is. And we have all context in Enscape. Now the height is not quite right, which I could have fixed in Blender, but one of the reasons I've left it high is that I can just move that arrow down until I'm happy with it. So if I just put that on the left side and then that on the right, I can pick my little arrow, say bring that down. Oh, it's got to come down a long way. Alright, I'm now able to get into the garage. Just have to come down a bit further. Oh, I'm pretty much there. So you can see here I've got a few items to clean up because there's a tree on the front that needs to be deleted. But I can basically do that and then just update the asset. But yeah, for my mind that's pretty good. You can now see quite clearly for this little house exactly what the issues are with overviewing of neighbors, all of the context surrounding you know, what intrusions you have. You can also see from on the deck how much of the neighbor's yard you'll be able to overlook, which is not great in this case. The one issue that I've got with this system is that the walk functionality is broken once these are loaded. So if I put it into walk mode, you'll see it just jump up in space. It seems to be jumping up to like the highest point of the asset. Maybe it's the top of this tree, something like that. So it's not treating it the same way it would topo, so I can't actually get it to go down. It just treats it like a big rectangular prism. So if I hit spacebar to go back into fly mode, I can still go and explore all the rooms and try and understand, you know, what you can and can't see on this block. I should say this design is very, very early days, really first pass at this design. But yeah, this context is really helpful. All I'd really need to make this work is to fix that walk issue so that when I hit spacebar I can actually walk around it. Can see if I go in here and hide that element, that now walk mode works perfectly fine. If I bring the element back, however, then it'll take a second to load all that geometry. You can see now I'm back into fly mode automatically. So yeah, I think that's a really useful workflow. There's lots of examples where this makes a really big difference. And yeah, it's probably not really necessary on a simple house like this. But yeah, any questions, post them in the comments. Hopefully I can help you troubleshoot. I'll post a link to that little family as well. See, you can turn that off so it's not visible in here and it doesn't affect the visibility in Enscape, just because it's the geometry inside the family that's hidden, not the family itself. Still works like a charm, and it won't show up in any of your views if you put it on your view template and turn that subcategory off. The other thing I would suggest doing is, once you've got it positioned correctly, is to pin that in place just to make sure that it doesn't accidentally get moved or deleted by someone who doesn't realize what it is, because it's pretty easy to delete a little random object like that. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. I look forward to seeing some of your amazing creations on the Enscape forum.